Hello and welcome to 30 Days to Learn Photoshop. This is day 20, saving and exporting files. My name's Ben Gribbin and in today's lesson we're going to look how to save and export files from Photoshop. So let's go ahead and switch to Photoshop and we're going to open a file like we did in the previous lesson. So let's open up this image here. This is a PSD file. We are going to consider the file formats that you need to or should be saving in. So saving files, dead easy, is just like opening them. All you need to do really in general is click on file and save, or file save as. Now this has grayed out the option to save because we haven't made any changes to it. So if we change that, we can now go and save that change to it, not that we would want to do. So keyboard shortcuts are Command S to save, Shift Command S to save as, and those would be Control S and Control Shift S on a Windows PC. Choosing the file format is a little bit more tricky. So let's go to File and Save As. This allows us to change the file format this design's in, and we can also change a couple of options down here which we'll consider now. We are working in PSD, which is the standard or native Photoshop file format, and this is the native file for Photoshop that allows it to retain the file's editability with all Photoshop features such as layers, effects, masks and so on, and it's also cross-compatible, or some of the features are cross-compatible with previous versions depending on how far you go back. But you may also want to save in another format. So in general, when you go to File and Save, on the first time you save a file, it will suggest you save it as a PSD file. That's fine, not a problem. But if it's a larger document, for example over 2 GB, which it could potentially be once you start adding layers and effects and things like that to a pretty detailed level, PSD only supports up to 2 GB, which is a kind of limitation that's been implied on several file formats such as audio formats as well, so that's not out of the norm. And if that's the case, then you need to consider using the large document format, which isn't an LDF file, it's actually a PSB file for whatever reason. So we could use that to save a larger file. If we wanted to save this file as an additional copy, we could click as a copy down here. So rather than just saving it for the first time, we could actually make a copy of whatever we were saving. So if we were working on a JPEG, we could save that as a copy as a PSB file. And also if you're working on large files, you might want to consider using a TIFF file, but that does lose sort of your editability of all the Photoshop features, whereas PSB is able to retain some of them. So when you're using 16-bit mode, which you probably will be in general, you're best off using Photoshop large document format or PSB, DICOM, JPEG, PDF or Photoshop RAWs, PNGs, that kind of thing, as well as a TIFF file. Whereas if you're using 32-bit, which is much more detailed and larger size files, you're better off either using a PSD if it's less than 2 GB, or a PSB, an OpenEXR, portable bitmap, Radiance, or a TIFF, and those are all options that you've got there. There's quite a lot, so don't get too bogged down with those. We also have the option to save kind of just normal files. So we can go to File Save As, and we can do it as a JPEG, and this would be just if you wanted to burn it to a disk and show some of your family members or just email it to them in general. When you do that, you get this JPEGs option menu, and this allows you to set the quality, and it also allows you to set a couple of ways the file actually will load. So we can turn down the file size, and it does affect the quality. It's a bit more difficult to tell at this kind of size, whereas if you were working on a smaller file, it does make a bit more of a difference. But you can see at 12, or the maximum quality setting, we've got an 8.3 megabytes file. If we turn it down to small file, it's only 512 kilobytes. So there's a happy medium, or alternatively, if you're not really bothered about the size, just go full and keep all the quality rather than losing some of it. Now another option that we have is we can save for web and devices. Now this gives you a couple of different file formats to work with, but it actually optimizes a file or a photograph for use on the web. So if you go ahead and go to File, Save for Web and Devices, or press Alt, Shift, Command and S, which it might just be easy to go to the menu. So click on that, and because this file is actually larger than a certain size, we need to perhaps just think about resizing it to slightly smaller. Let's just do that. If we go to File, Save for Web and Devices, we can now change this file's format. We can optimize it, we can think about the way it works and how it will load, and we can also get a preview. So we've put the JPEG here to maximum, we've set the quality to maximum, and we can set in progressive, which means when it's loading, it's going to load in stages, and that optimized does a similar sort of thing. We can set the matte, which is able to simulate transparency, but in general you'll be alright if you just leave that on 0. And we can also convert it to have a generic color profile. We can remove color profiles from it. We can add metadata, which is sort of information about the author and the creator of it. So using this menu, we can set the size, we can set the height, we can change how it loads again using quality there, and we can set the amount of colours in it if we really wanted to. We can also change the format to GIF, which are generally smaller files, and also support the ability to do animations. But as you can see, a GIF compared to a JPEG here, there's quite a big difference in quality and the way that colours are being represented. Let's just zoom out so you can see the difference. Not quite as noticeable, however, you do have sort of bands of colours, blocks of colours, rather than a nice smooth image. And you are able to tweak around with the settings here, upping the amount of colours to 256, which most graphic cards now support. And you can also set it to PNG 8, which is an 8-bit image, which is pretty small. And also you can do a 24-bit PNG image. Now this actually allows you to save transparency, so it's a good setting. GIF can do it as well, but GIF will add a little bit of anti-aliasing and things where you don't want it. So PNG 24 can save out transparency, it can be interlaced, so it loads much nicer. It'll actually load in groups in different areas, so it kind of feels like it's loading all as one rather than going from top to bottom. And again, you can save all your colour modes and profiles in with those and resize it. So just to summarise, JPEG is kind of your default for pictures on computers and the web, whereas GIFs allow you to do animations and create smaller graphics, and PNGs allow you to save reasonably sized images but also include transparency in them. So then all we would do is go to save, which you can't see because it's off the edge of our screen, and just save it wherever we want, hit save, and that will then save that file out as an optimized file. And finally, one thing you'll want to remember whilst you're working on documents in Photoshop, particularly when you get into PSDs and complicated, highly detailed files with lots of layers and effects, you want to save regularly. Now there's programs you can download to be able to auto save for you so you don't forget, but it's much easier just to press save every couple of minutes just in case you crash or something happens that would ruin the file otherwise. So what have we learned in today's lesson? Well, we've considered file formats in Photoshop and which file formats we should choose, and we also looked at how we can save a file to be optimized for the web. And your task for this lesson is to create a new blank document and save it as both a PSD file and then a JPEG using the normal save as command. So create a file, save it as a PSD, and then save it as a JPEG. Next time on 30 Days to Learn Photoshop, we're looking at blending modes and options. Thanks for listening.